Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this webinar. It's a Q&A with two academics in universities in Africa, and the overarching topic will be academic research in Africa. Today, I have with me also Mary Swaney, who will be asking the questions, and I'll be chairing the webinar today. So first, I'd like to introduce, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. So Bashar, why don't you go next?
Right. My name is Bashar Haruna Gulumbi, and since 2015, I've been working as a teaching and research assistant at Federal University, Birnin Kebbi State, Nigeria. And in the last 5 years, I have published quite a number of articles, I think up to 12 peer-reviewed articles, and I've also attended conferences in Nigeria and outside Nigeria.
Great, thank you very much. And Christopher?
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm Christopher Opolo. I'm a researcher and a lecturer in Ahmadu Bello University, in Zaria, Nigeria. So my research interest is on the development of biological control agents, especially the use of nematodes to control insect pests. And this is coming in the spate of pollution of chemical insecticides on crops. So my interest is to develop sustainable biological control agents to control insect pests. And I have been in the university for about 3 years. And prior to that, I was a training consultant for a Swedish agri-tech company based in Ghana. And it's also a research-based company as well. So it's nice to share my experience in this webinar.
Great, thank you very much. Just a note, if you don't mind to speak a bit louder or closer to the microphone, we could hear Bashar well, but just you, maybe you can speak close to the microphone. So, and note for everyone, we have added a lot of your questions that you've submitted when registering for the webinar. Thank you very much. Lots of interesting questions. You can ask additional questions in the chat box. You can message me directly or chat to everyone, and then I'll read them out after Mary has asked all the questions included in this webinar. So now over to Mary to introduce the themes.
Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're talking about academic research in Africa, and the themes that we're going to be discussing during this webinar are open research, choosing where to publish, research output, and collaboration and research, and then lastly access to research. And as Christina said, that we had a number of good questions from yourselves which we have incorporated into the deck. But if there are extra questions that you wish to ask at the end of the session, then please feel free to do so.
Okay, so starting with the first theme.
So open research and choosing where to publish. So to our panelists today, to Christopher and Bashir. Christopher, if you want to go first. What do you see are the benefits of open research?
So open research really makes one's work very accessible and easily citable. It gives visibility to one's efforts and one's research work. Open research goes beyond access to articles. It starts with the methodology, the access to the equipment used, and of course, the software and the software codes used for analyzing data. In recent times, publishers refer or prefer academics to use open source software for data analysis, such as R, and make them easily accessible on GitHub. So open research really helps want to collaborate more openly with the international community and also aids reproducibility of the research work. So, and I think open research is really the main hub now, because most research are funded by public funds, and to get more funding, it is best to publicly show the results of one's research. And that is where the main benefits of open research, because the more visible you are, the more tendency you will get more funding to have more research work done.
Yeah, and to add to that, in addition to what Mr. Okolo has said, open research also increases collaborations. So if you publish your work, you share it with the scientific community through open research, other people in the other part of the world could see your research, and you can then initiate collaborations. In addition, we that are in Africa, probably we don't have, so many institutions in Africa don't have access to subscription journals. So with open research, researchers in Africa could get access to not only published articles, but also important softwares for analyzing data. And of course, it increases reproducibility of research project.
Thank you. So to ask both of you then, is open access a factor for you when you're actually choosing a journal to publish in?
Yes, certainly. For me, since it enhances the tendencies of collaboration, and it's make somebody more visible to the scientific community, certainly it is a factor for me to consider when publishing my article, because especially for those researchers that are in Africa, if I publish my work in a journal or subscription journal where the article may not be freely accessible to researchers, I think it is going to narrow down the chances of collaborations, and it will reduce visibility. So I consider open access as a factor in publishing my research work.
I have mixed feelings with open access publication. As an author, I would like to publish my work and not pay too much for it. But then as a reader, I would love to have other people's work freely available for me to read. So it's a two-way thing. In Africa, we rarely have the opportunity to get our publication funded by funding bodies. Most times we do it ourselves, and we have to pay a lot to get this published. And then the reader gets it for free. So it's really, really mixed feelings for me. If we can have a system whereby authors don't have to pay too much to publish their work, well, after going through the stress and expenses of doing the research, and then you have to pay to publish it only for others to get it for free. If we can get a very, very strong waiver, or even publishing at no cost, then that will really, really be great. That would make it really open access. But from what we have today, open access is having the reader having access to your research articles, but then you, the author, will have to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. The next question relates to factors and key metrics, the factors that you look for when you're deciding where to publish, and it's come from Henry Spielberg, the associate publisher at BMJ. So he's listed a number of factors: citation, impact factor, acceptance rate, etc. So what are the key metrics you look for in a journal when
well, I think
published?
For me, I look at it, I try to combine virtually all these factors, because looking at, for example, time to publish, you may tend to fall in the hands of predatory journals. If you only pick a factor and you said, I'm going to consider how long it takes to get my article published, you may end up getting, involved in this predatory stuff. So I try to combine all these factors, and certainly I also consider the open access nature of the paper, of the journal.
Yes, so these key parameters stated by Henry are paramount. But added to these, I would also want to know the aim and the scope of the journal. And then, yeah, what time it takes between acceptance and publication. But most importantly, it would be nice to know how much the author have to pay, because for me, that's also very, very important. And now there is a tendency that a journal that doesn't charge much gets very, very little visibility, and the impact factor is very low. But then there's always a trade-off. So time for acceptance and then the per page charges to the authors also plays a very important role for me to decide where to publish.
Okay, thank you. So leading on from that, many publishers, as you mentioned before, you mentioned about waivers previously, many publishers of fully open access journals actually offer waivers and discounts for article processing charges for papers whose corresponding authors are based in low-income countries. Have you ever applied for a waiver or a discount? And if yes, how did you find the process?
Yes, I once did. That was about 5 years ago. And this percentage waived wasn't really significant, honestly. And it was on the high side. And what the short stories that I eventually did not publish there. Because it's one thing to say that there's going to be a waiver, and the second part is how many percent waive from the standard charge. And most times it's just on paper, but there's always a discount. But there are some other back-end charges that makes the waive not really significant.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, since access to funding is a factor in Africa. So when publishing, I certainly go for journals that don't charge anything to publish. So I've never had a case of seeking for a APC waiver. I always search for such journals that accept articles and publish at no cost. So no need for applying for waivers. I have never had, but certainly I'm aware that some journals offer waivers for researchers from Africa.
Okay. And sort of another question around that, do you think publishers are transparent enough about costs, and especially APC costs?
I don't think so.
Well, from my experience, I think there are some hidden charges that they are not completely transparent about.
Just a question that is come through the chat box, and you kind of answered it about waivers and discounts. Are you aware of such discounts? Obviously, Christopher, you've applied. Bashar, you haven't. But are you aware when discounts and waivers are available to you? There are certain publishers that offer up to 100% discount depending on the country.
I'm aware, I'm fully aware. In fact, I had a case considering whether to publish in a particular journal, and I realized that even with that kind of waiver, I cannot afford to pay. So I'm certainly aware of the waiver.
Okay, thank you.
So there is this digital access platform called Agora, and it's mostly for agricultural research. So they make it easy for researchers to get access to easy publication. But then African low-income countries are also in different categories. And it turns out that Nigeria doesn't belong to low-income countries according to their own parameters. So maybe countries like Niger or Sudan might fall into 100% waiver, but not Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next theme.
Yep, so the next theme is around research output, and various questions have come up from our attendees. But to start the ball rolling, what would help the advancement of African scientific research output?
In my opinion, adequate funding is one of the key factors that have undermined the advancement of scientific research in Africa. Many researchers in this part of the world are constrained with the fact that they don't have access to adequate funding to carry out research. There is also an issue of access to high quality published articles at no cost. You see, so most of the high impact factor journals, you see that their articles are not freely available for researchers from Africa, because so many universities in Africa don't have this subscription for researchers to get access to articles in their libraries. So funding, free access to publish work, so that when you get adequate funding, you'll be able to get the right literature to work with. And of course, eventually right collaboration to work with or collaborators. Yeah.
So there is a platform called the African Journal Online. It's been in operation since 1998. I think it started from South Africa. They have about 54 African countries publishing journals publishing through the African Journal Online. Now, it will really help if AJO, African Journal Online, could serve as a larger platform to pool all African research and make them really visible. I think they only have about just a few journals from Nigeria. Most of the journals come from South Africa and Tanzania, but then there are still a lot more not captured. So it will really help the visibility of what we do in Africa if we can have a platform like AJO and other platforms from outside Africa pool all African research work and make them really visible. In that way, our research outputs can really reach the ends of the world.
Yeah, interesting, thank you. What does the term research excellence mean to you, and how has it affected your institution and its output?
Okay, so for me, research excellence means that whatever research I'm conducting has an impact on the society, either within my community or in the wider society. And to achieve this, it means that the objectives of what I'm doing really have to be clear. And the institution that I'm publishing under should have a framework to guide me to make sure that whatever research I'm doing meets up with the expected level of excellence and with the expected level of what I aim to achieve. So for instance, here at the Ahmadu Bello University, we have what we call annual review, research review meetings. And every research hosted within the institute have an annual review and presentation of what has been done, what are the challenges, and what ways can other researchers come in to help out. In this way, everybody is on the watch and on his toes to make sure that whatever is being funded with public fund achieve a high excellence. So for us, that's also what research excellence means to us.
And for me, I think research excellence has to do with the ethical nature of your research. Did you conduct your research ethically? What is the eventual impact of your research? It goes beyond that. Is your research able to, in addition to the impact to the immediate community, to your immediate community, have you been able to initiate collaborations? So in that, if you've done your work ethically, the work is of high quality, it is impactful, and you are able to establish collaboration, I can say you achieve research excellence.
Okay, thank you. So the next question really follows on from what you're both saying about research excellence and research having a positive impact. And this is also now sought after in sort of ex post evaluations. And I know that research evaluations have become not only common in many African countries, but also they've become increasingly more complex. So what is your opinion on that?
So from my experience, in my own field in agriculture, so we have a unit called agricultural extension work. So these are the units, agricultural extension and outreach. These are the units that follow up with all research to find out if the research work or the research output is of benefit to the target community. For instance, if we release a new breed of maize, it's the extension unit that follows up to find out if they have any increase in yield, if there are reduced pest incidents, if the soil is able to, if the crop are able to adapt to the change in climate and the rest of that. But then it's really complex because we found out that to really finance this extension agent to go out for the post research evaluation, it costs a lot of money. Sometimes it costs even more than the research itself because a lot of logistics comes into play, traveling, accommodation, feeding, and the rest of them. So it's really, really complex. And honestly, I don't really know how to go about this, but then that is the situation we find at hand. So we find that when budgets are made for research, that of the extension and outreach units, that those are the guys who do the evaluation, turns out to be a lot more expensive than the research itself.
Yeah, so as a writer, it's still a problem, a complex problem of majorly issue of funding. You know, in the academia, we have this this slogan, publish or perish. So African researchers found themselves in the academia, and the only way to excel is to publish. And, people get themselves, trapped by predatory journals where they publish, sometimes even they fabricate data and publish. So I believe strongly that the aspect of research evaluation, that there is hardly any provision to evaluate, to even carry out the research itself, let alone evaluating it in fact. So I believe so strongly that it is a complex issue in Africa.
Okay, thank you. And I think you've more or less covered the next question. So we have got a question from Abiola from ICE Publishing, and he wants to know, how can publishers actually help authors in Africa more?
How publishers?
How can publishers help authors? So help authors or researchers in Africa?
Well, here, I think especially for publishers that, charge high APCs to publish in their work, in their journals, rather, publishers could help by entirely, not partial waivers, entirely waiving the APCs. In addition to the waivers, personally, I feel sometimes the publishing world is kind of, this is my personal opinion, is discriminatory. There are some form of discriminations. Sometimes you see journal publishing work that you are confident that this work is not better than what you have done. You are confident that your work will be accepted by the journal, by the publishers, but eventually you get your article turned down. So I think it's there are two ways. One, waiving the APC, and then, of course, let us have a fair play, irrespective of where you come from, whether you are from Africa. They shouldn't look down on us that, oh, this article is from Africa, it has nothing to offer. I think in these two ways, they can help African researchers and authors.
So yeah, just to add a little bit on this. So there is a statistics from the Nigerian Publishers Association. They serve about 1.2 billion people, and they make a profit of almost $1 billion. That's a lot of money. So it will really do a lot of good to the authors if there will be a reduction in the publishers of what the authors have to pay. And just to add to what Bashar said, most publishers do double-blind review, and I think that also helps. But then the challenge is most publishers, especially those in Africa, have very small circuit of reviewers. And I've had an issue where a publisher sent an article to one of the authors to review an article that his team sent out. It's really, really crazy and terrible. So the team of reviewers, the team of editors are really, really not that diverse. It's just a small select people. And this breeds a lot of predatory journals.
Thank you. We have a follow-up question, and you, Christopher, answered it, but I'll ask Bashar do you think double-blind review will help fight this perceived discrimination?
In a way, it can help. Yeah, sorry, Bashar. In a way, it can help, but then when the reviewer looks at the content, he can already tell, especially when in the materials and methods, where he has to state the location where the research was done, the reviewer can already guess to an extent whose work is it or which group it came from. So double-blinding review helps to an extent, but not entirely remove the issue of discrimination.
I believe it can help to some extent, actually, if the identity of the author is concealed. But to some extent, that is, if the identity of the author is concealed, even during the process of peer review, chances are, if there are discriminations, you don't even know where the author is from. But certainly, the editor of the journal is going to know, because eventually you are going to submit detailed author information and your affiliation, and they know where you come from. And irrespective of the decision or comments from reviewers, editors can always decide, oh, this guy is that guy, so we should not publish. So to some extent, it can improve and reducing discrimination.
Thank you.
Thanks both. So different question from Juliet Kaplan, who is Director of Product at Research Square, and she wants to know, do you use preprints? And what is your biggest challenge in disseminating your research?
Yes, I even recently I drafted a research proposal for PTDF funding here in Nigeria, and I remember I used 2 preprints articles, and the challenges I face personally in disseminating my research actually has to do with, you know, sometimes you see a journal that you feel the article can go in, you can publish and get the world to have access to your work, but because you don't have that APC, you cannot publish in that big journal. You have to go down, maybe looking for a journal irrespective of its impact factor. If it is a genuine non-predatory journal, and submit to it, which the dissemination of your article or your work is going to be narrowed in doing that.
I have never sent out preprints, but I've used a couple, a few preprints from other researchers to improve on my work. But the challenge is really, can these preprints be cited? Some publications, some publishers accept citing preprints, but most don't. And there is this fear, especially in the African community, that one might steal your ideas and then polish it up and publish. So it's a little bit tricky over here in Africa. So I never sent out any preprints.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to collaboration and research, how do you collaborate on research with your peers, both nationally and internationally?
Well, nationally, I collaborate with my colleagues at work who eventually have networks of collaborators in other institutions. And internationally, of course, through my colleagues still, I was able to initiate a collaboration with one US-based microbiologist. You know, it's sometimes difficult internationally because of our levels of experience, and sometimes, you know, potential collaborator has to go through your own profile and see what do you have to offer, you know. So I also utilize social media platforms such as LinkedIn. I remember I was able to successfully initiate a collaboration with a Nigerian researcher based in Ahmadu Bello University, not Okolo certainly, someone from microbiology who our article is presently under review with a journal. So that's how I make use of colleagues, my connections here at work, and then make use of social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter, and of course, ResearchGate.
So it is a common knowledge that Africa have the diversity, but very limited technical know-how and the tools to conduct the research. So from the international sphere, what I do is to collect samples here and then send them out for, say, molecular analysis or other forms of technical complex analysis. And then we both get to share in the benefits of the research. And this has been going on for a very long time. I remember when I was conducting my master's at Ghent University in Belgium, I had to get some samples from Nigeria, from Ethiopia, and then get them analyzed over there, and then also send some samples to Germany and within Nigeria. So we take advantage of what we have, and then which is the diversity, and then make use of the technical experts of our colleagues in the developed countries, and also use the technical know-how and the facilities over there.
Okay, do you use ResearchGate at all? I know that you did mention it briefly, but how big a role does ResearchGate play in for you?
For me,
go on, Basha.
All right. For me, I use it to contact potential collaborators, and I also use it to request for research articles from researchers. Sometimes you see a paper that is going to certainly help you in conducting your own work, but you see that paper is not freely accessible. So I use ResearchGate. If the author is from ResearchGate, I use ResearchGate to request for articles, and of course, initiate discussions into possible collaborations with authors.
Yeah, just to follow up to what Bashar said, ResearchGate for me is a way of getting behind the paywall of publishers. So if the publisher already has an article, and I can easily request to make it available to me, and if he agrees, most often, I think I have never had any rejection from any author that I contacted to send a full version of a text. So for me, it's the ultimate go behind the paywall of any research article. So it's an amazing tool. And I also get to follow researchers' projects and ask important questions, and also get also add a feedback to other people's questions. And it's really nice to see how one fares on the research index. So one gets to see how other people view your work, and what impacts one's work is making other people's research.
Thank you. Have either of you used Sci-Hub?
Yes. It's awesome. So
yeah. Well, you know, it's it's unethical to use Sci-Hub, but certainly we are our hands are tied. You know, sometimes you need this paper, you need it, and you contacted the what do you call it? You contacted the author of the paper, and no response, and you have Sci-Hub at your disposal. We use it, but I know it's unethical to use Sci-Hub. The best way is to get articles that are freely accessible through subscriptions, or you talk to the authors of the journal and try to see if you can get a pre-published article. But certainly, I use it in the past.
I'm
not in the past. I also use it in the present.
On that note, we have a note from Henry Spielberg talking about Research for Life, and he's saying that free access to high-quality journal content is available through Research for Life for institutions in most African countries. Are you aware of Research for Life?
I'm aware of it, but it's like It's not available, you said, for most African countries.
There's no Nigeria.
Yeah, my institution is a developing young institution. And I'm aware of Research Life, but I don't think it is available in my institution.
Okay.
So Research Life is a great tool. One of the arms that's really of interest to me is this Agora, and then the OARE, and of course the HINARI, which is for the medical section. So Ahmadu Bello University has been there for a very long time, so it's a well-established institution, and we have access to some of the digitally deposited research work on it. But even within the institution in Ahmadu Bello, we have what we call open access article within the university, and we also have a link with MIT. So it's on the website under the resource toolbar. So researchers can have access to articles even beyond the university, and then articles within the university, theses, and some other publications are openly and easily accessible to staff, members, and students as well.
Thank you.
And to add, I use this international network for the availability of scientific publications. I get a lot of freely published articles from journals on that site. I understand that they come in to help some African universities get subscriptions to some of these academic databases.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is a bit of a philosophical question, but what's your vision for science and research in your country?
For me, we researchers from Africa, we have all it takes. We have the potential as researchers. We've seen it. African researchers has gone out to the in the developed countries, and they excel. They are making us proud. But we that are still in Africa, working in Africa, we have a lot of hurdles and challenges, including, like I always say, access to adequate funding, restrictions. You know, sometimes you need an article, but you cannot get it. You need a publication, you cannot get it. You want to go to a conference and share your findings, you don't have conference registration fees. So I want to see Africa that is free of those hurdles.
So it is very easy to blame funding, lack of availability of facilities. But there is also the need to change an attitude on how we approach our research. Sometimes we just do research just to publish and then get enough articles to be promoted, because the basis for promotion and most African universities, certainly in Nigeria, is the numbers of papers, not who cites the paper or the impact of the research article, the research output. So I think the change in attitude is my vision for African research, where research will be conducted with the aim in mind to have a positive impact on a group or a community. And then the reading culture is really, really poor. Most times we don't really take out enough time to read. Most people get the most of the information on social media. Yeah, we need articles, but when those articles come up, very few people really sit down to read and get the message in those articles before reproducing, using the methodology to apply to one's work. So the attitude to research, making show that whatever research one does is for an aim, and then to really, really reach. It's my vision for African research.
Excellent. So probably a personal note now. What would you do to inspire the next generation of researchers in Africa personally? So what do you think your contribution will be?
So, yeah, go ahead, Bashir.
Well, for me, I think I can inspire young African scientists by doing the right thing, mentoring them, advising them, and then making an impact. I think if young African scientists got the necessary mentorship and they get the necessary advice, I think they will be inspired. And when they see that you don't just talk, the impact of what you are doing is felt, then certainly they will get inspired.
I have a group of students that I meet regularly with, from undergraduate and postgraduate students. So what we do is to make sure that whatever research we are conducting have at least a minute impact to a primary target. And my aim of meeting regularly with this group of students is to help them maintain consciousness in whatever they do. Another way that I inspire other researchers in Africa is conducting seminars. I have conducted a number of seminars, especially in skill acquisition, in data mining, statistics, use of R, use of Python to conduct a statistical analysis. Recently, I had a seminar at another university. This gives me another room for some commercials. I did a researcher ambassador. I did a researcher seminar and also an EndNote seminar, helping other students to learn and apply how to prepare PowerPoint or make presentation on Prezi, or using Tableau for data visualization. So these really very small activities, but in the long run, a few people pick up the skills and then take it from there. So these are the little activities that I do to inspire the next generation of African researchers, especially in Nigeria.
That sounds very admirable. So I know there's a lot of conflict between teaching and conducting research and the time that's available for both. So how do you maintain the balance between teaching and conducting research?
So can I start?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So it's really tricky. So I am a lecturer and I also conduct research. Now, what I do is to make sure that the technical staff are really well informed of what experiments I'm conducting in the lab, and I follow up regularly. So most of the routine work that needs to be done in the lab is handled by the technical staff, and I come in to check, collect the data, and analyze it. Now, this gives me some free time to prepare my lessons and then conduct the lecture. But what I have started doing from the last 2 years is to make my lecture notes freely available online. So the university has a platform called Moodle, ABU Moodle, where every student needs to enroll for each course, and then they have access to the lecture notes and the PowerPoints and some other free texts and articles for them to read up before the actual class. And then all my classes, all the classes have projector and smart boards So I can present my lectures very easily using PowerPoint and Prexy. So it really makes the teaching very, very easy. And I can also conduct the tests online. Some of the tests can be done online to assess their rate of assimilation and understanding. So I really make use of the technologies available to me to really make life easy for me. But I just hope I can have more time to really maximize and make it a lot more efficient. Sometimes I wish you can have like 30 hours a day and not 24 hours a day just to achieve a lot of things.
Yeah, so I do know that every university lecturer is eventually a researcher. So right from the get-go, I'm aware for me to excel as a university teacher, I have to conduct research, make an impact, and get published. So I try to create a balance between conducting research and teaching by having a kind of timetable. Mostly I do things that have to do with research on Thursdays, Fridays, and weekends, because at home, I can begin to draft manuscripts if necessary. I can read, publish articles indirectly, preparing for teaching, and also preparing to publish an article. So sometimes it's difficult to separate the two, because part of what we do, we also mentor undergraduate students. So sometimes you are designing a small project for an undergraduate, you are mentoring them, and as well, you are getting yourself prepared for the class work. So it's difficult to really separate the two, but I try to create a balance.
Oh, thank you. The next question is around orchid IDs and how widely are they used in your institution? Are orchid IDs commonplace for researchers and authors in African countries?
I don't know how widely used it is, certainly, but I do know quite a number of colleagues have these IDs, and I have mine. And I do know that one of the major importance of this ID that it gives you ownership or control of your published work. So once you publish your work, you can manage all your published work, whether a book, an article, a peer-reviewed article, you get them together through this ID. So I know quite a number of colleagues use them, and I use it too. I have it on my CV and online profiles.
Yes, so yeah, I have the ORCID ID, which helps me to link all my research, publication, conferences, proceedings, all in a single unit. And it helps me gain visibility. It helps me gain wide, people can easily see what I'm doing, because it's a single ID that connects a lot of things. So I have it linked to my ResearchGate account. I have a link to my researcher account, and I have it on my Google Scholar account. So it's kind of really knits all the research work one pushes out together. Well, for Ahmadu Bello University, I cannot really say how widely used, but I know that it's still not at an appreciable level.
Oh, that's good to hear. We have a last question in this section about if you are seeking financial aid, will you manage to get it to pursue your research? And I think we've covered a lot of that already. This is from Smita at Crimson Interactive. But if you wanted to share with us whether or not either of you are actively seeking financial aid at the moment, it's entirely up to you.
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed financial aid quite a while. I got financial aid for my master's work, which fully sponsored the research work in Belgium. And I had opportunity of traveling around about 10 European countries to conduct research at different labs. And I was recently offered a DRRD scholarship for development-related studies for a PhD at the University of Bonn at the Center for Research Development. So it's really competitive, and especially coming from developing countries, one really needs to stand out, especially in what one has done before from the undergraduate work, and have a very strong proposal. So research seeking financial aid comes in really, really handy when one has a very clear focus. And I've also enjoyed financial aid in the massively open online course, especially on Coursera. I've taken about 20 courses online, and all have been under financial aid. I've never had to pay for any of them, and they have really, really been resourceful in getting a lot of knowledge.
Okay.
And I think for me, the answer to the question is yes.
Okay, that's great. And just a note, I want to say we have less than 5 minutes. We can overrun slightly to ask all the interesting questions, but I would appreciate if you guys give the short, kind of clear answers for these last set of questions. But then for those of you that need to leave the next 5 minutes, I'll be distributing the recording by email, so you wouldn't miss anything. So yeah, back to the questions. This is the last set of questions.
Okay, so last section then, and it's about access to research. How do you currently keep up with new research being published?
Yeah, one of the things I do, I subscribe for email alerts to some journals in my field. So once a new publication is released, they inform me via email. I also follow some selected journals on Twitter, and I activated that notification. So once there is a new article, I know. And of course, recently, I make use of the Researcher app.
Great.
So
That's good to hear.
prior to the advent of Researcher app, I used Google Scholar. It was really, really handy. And then gradually I moved to ResearchGate. And now Researcher app turns out to be the honey, because it pulls all the articles streamlined to the keywords that I need. And it comes up like a social media feed, so I can easily read the abstract. So what I use now is the Researcher app, and I have it synced on my the web platform for a more broader view.
Thank you. We weren't actually looking for an endorsement there, but it's nice to hear that you're actually using the app. So, and you mentioned publisher, sign up to publishers' article alerts. How often, following on from that, how often do you actually browse or search for new papers? Is it, or does it depend on your research cycle and where you are in the research cycle?
Yeah, it certainly depends on whether we are in research cycle. Mostly during the end of every session, we have a lot of need to mentor the undergrads, and of course a lot of need to help them and carry them along and teach them how to source for high quality articles. So it depends on the time.
So for me, I have kind of automated how I get recent papers or articles. So I have on my Researcher app, I have like three keyword filter. Yeah, 3 key filter. So when there are new articles, it just gives me a notification on my mobile, and I can just easily check to know what is new. So for me, I don't have to consciously go searching for new article. It just pops up automatically, and it really makes life very easy for me.
Yeah, I do wish I had research around when I was at university, but hey ho. Do you feel that you dedicate enough time to finding out what's new and what your peers are up to?
Yeah, I believe I dedicate quite enough time in trying to find out what is new, particularly in my area of research interest. I take a lot of time in addition to all those automated alerts. I also take time to uh, search and find out what is really new, including the use of social media platforms.
So time is never enough to find out and really use what I found. So what I do is that when I get something new, I quickly sync it to my EndNote reference manager. And if the article is freely available, I just download it. So I create time every Friday in the evening to just sit down and then read through. If it's just the abstracts and then the discussion of the article to find out what is interesting in the new article. So for me, it's kind of like a system to really keep up to date with what is happening in my field of interest.
Okay. So how do your students access content then? Do they access it on your recommendation, or are they proactive, or you know?
It's a mix up. Sometimes you have students from different backgrounds, and some of them are hard working on their own. Before you know it, they have the first draft of their research proposal. But some of them will come back to you and said, I have no idea where to get article Z, article X. So what I do, I sit down with them and I introduce them to some of these online academic databases, such as the Directory for Open Access, PubMed, since I'm from medical and life sciences, ResearchGate, and of course, recently, the Researcher app.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, what I do from time to time is to organize seminars for the students, both undergraduate and the postgraduate, masters and PhD students. So in this way, I help them to get enlightened in the vast resources of how to get information and how to organize it and use them. Very few of them have the initiative to go a long way to do it for themselves. But in a way, I think the internet is a good thing, but then in a way it's a bad thing because most students spend their time on Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, instead of using that time to really get something useful for the academics.
All right, the last question was around social media, but I think we've more or less covered that. So, Christina, if are there any questions from our...
Not from the attendees of the webinar at the moment. If there are any additional questions about to our speakers, you can get in touch with me or Mary. Our email addresses are on the slide at the moment, and or if anyone has questions about Researcher or about how we work with publishers, they can also get in touch. And I'd like to say huge thanks to Christopher Okolo and Bashar Haruna Columba today for taking the time to answer all these interesting questions and provide with very kind of insightful answers. And thanks to Mary as well for chairing this session. And thank you everyone for attending as well.
Thank you for having us.